Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Southeast Media Sunrise, dedicated to giving a voice to authors of all genres. I'm your host, Jodi Hockinson. Joining us remotely by phone today is J.L. Hill, author of Killer with Three Heads, Book 2 in the Killer series. James L. Hill created RockHill Publishing LLC to publish his own work and give others access to the literary world. He's a multi-genre author, a prolific storyteller, now working on a 4-part Killer series about gangsters and mobsters in New York. Books 1 and 2 have received 5-star reviews. The 3-part historical fantasy Gemstone Series covers men, mermaids, and dragons. He pens sci-fi as well. Welcome, James, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jodi. I'm glad to be here.
So tell me, what is the driving force behind your desire to write?
Ever since I was a kid, I always had stories to tell. I always had things going on inside my head. I lived in multiple different universes, and I would want to get those stories out. I have to get them out because, the imagination drives everything. So that's my driving force behind writing. I have a very vivid imagination and a lot of stories.
Well, at what age did you start writing?
Really early. I started writing like around 8 or 9, something like that. I started writing because of comic books. God bless Dan Lee, because we would get the comic books. They were 10 cents at the time. Shows how old I am. And we would read the comics, and then we would trace out the characters, and then I would work on the next story. Dan Lee always wrote stories in series. So, you read one comic and there's the next one coming out next month, and I would try to guess at what the next part of the story will be and that kind of thing. And that's what really got me interested in writing.
How often were you right when you were guessing the end of the stories?
Not at all. Stanley was a much better author than I was.
I think maybe you might have had an imagination in a different direction. Maybe that was a really good thing.
Yes. And really, some of the stories were really good because he would bring in the next superhero, and they would come in as a villain at first, and they would have to fight. Like, let's take the Silver Surfer. When he first came into the Fantastic Four story, he was a bad guy. He was picking out worlds for Galactus to destroy, and so the Fantastic Four fought him and all that kind of stuff. And finally, he turns out to be a good guy in the end. And so if you would follow in that series, you have him being this bad guy and everything, and how he's going to destroy and everything. And you had no idea that Galactus was coming. Then finally, towards the end, here comes the real bad guy, Galactus, and the Silver Surfer turns out to be a good guy. He helped save the Earth, and he's punished for it. I learned a lot about storytelling from comics, and the idea of there's always consequences. No one's ever fully good or bad, that kind of thing,
So what took you so long to get published?
Well, I started way back in my 20s trying to get published. And at first I started writing novels, but it would take so long to write a novel, a year or so. And then you have to go through the whole submitting to agents, submitting to this. And I said, well, let me take a shorter cut and let me write short stories. And I started writing short stories and tried to submit them to magazines like Osmanoff, Popular Science, Playboy, all kinds of places, And I'm submitting stories and everything. And guess what? It takes just as long to get a short story published as it did a novel. So I kind of fell out of love with the publishing industry and all of that kind of stuff. And plus, I then had to actually start providing for a family. And I got into computer programming, which was my other love. In high school, I started in computer programming and everything. And once I got into that took off. And I was fully involved in programming and learning programming. And I would learn languages just for fun. I would sit there with a programming book just to figure out how this thing worked and what you could do with it. And it took me out of writing somewhat. And so, of course, it was just impossible to get into the what's name. It's a heartbreaking, soul-crushing experience trying to get published. And so I got away from that, had a family, was doing programming, working, that kind of thing. But I was still writing somewhat. But I was writing like when I was going to work on the train back in New York. I had an hour ride, so I can sit down on the train and write stories. I've been going up and down Manhattan. So, but I didn't have any desire to publish them, to go through the whole publishing and stuff like that, gauntlet again. And I was just waiting for my time when I would start self-publishing. And then a few years, 5-10 years ago, somewhere along there, I decided, okay, now desktop publishing, computers, all this kind of stuff, now I can actually publish my own. And then I not only decided to publish my own work, I decided I would publish other people's work to make it easier for people to actually publish their books.
So you talked about Stan Lee being one of your influences. What other influences came along for you?
Stephen King was a very big influence in my reading and in my writing. And Edgar Allan Poe was another big one. I loved Edgar Allan Poe work. One of the classic writers. I write a lot of dark material. So I think, that's one of the reasons why I probably write a lot of dark material, because of Edgar Allan Poe. But I also like the way Stephen King worked his stories and his themes. There was always somewhat of a religious theme to his story, but more of a moral theme to his stories, And I kind of like that. Plus, he mixed in science and kind of like a modern type of feel to his stories. So there was always the idea of good and bad, and a godlike presence to some of his stories. Could this be something that you can do that would be, godlike? You get godlike powers. What do you do with them? That type of thing. But the powers came through some sort of modern day thing, like Firestarter. Let's take that one, for example. He had the idea that these people went in and they volunteered for some science experiment at school, in college. And then years later, they wind up with a daughter who has all these powers because they were given these psychotropic drugs. So they had powers, the husband and wife had powers, but the daughter had a lot of powers. And then, of course, the government tried to step in and take control of her.
So what would you say your greatest achievement is to date?
Other than my children, my greatest achievement is actually publishing books.
Aww.
I got 4 books published. And yeah, it took a lot to get there. So I got the 2 Killer books, Killer with a Heart, Killer with 3 Heads. That's part of the Killer series. They're going to be 4 books altogether. I'm working on the 3rd one now. You mentioned The Emerald Lady, which is a fantasy, which I just started. I decided to jump into fantasy because I did the NaNoWrite mode. And at NaNoWrite mode, you write a novel, 50,000 words in a month. And I wanted to do it. I kept missing the date. And finally, I said, ooh, it's November, NaNoWrite mode. So I jumped into that. And because I never wrote like that before, where you just sit down and write straight through without stopping, without going back, without correcting anything, just sit down and just plow through it, I decided to write in a genre that I never tried before. So I've done science fiction, I've done adult crime stories, I never did fantasy. So I figured it was going to be a new way to write, and therefore I was throwing out everything I'd done before, and I decided to do a fantasy, a historical fantasy. So I wrote The Emerald Lady, which is going to be a 3-parter.
Oh, okay. We'll look forward to seeing it.
Yes, I'm working on the 2nd part, The Ruby Cradle, now.
So what would you say your greatest disappointment is to date?
My greatest disappointment is I took so long to actually go ahead and start publishing my own work. Had I known now what I didn't know then, that you could actually do this, and it's not as hard as everybody thinks it is, I would have been publishing years ago. You can't get back time.
Yeah, it's so true. So why write in different genres?
Because different things interest me, and the ways in which you approach them tells a different story. For example, you can write a story about the same thing, but if you write it from a science fiction type of story, then you're going to approach it in one manner and one type of thing. If you're writing it in the fantasy world, you're going to write it the same story, but you're going to write it in a different manner and have different qualities to that story. Same thing with like adult fiction. So it's the idea that each genre has its own peculiarities to it and its own flavor to it. And I just like different things, and different stories, different ideas lend themselves to these different genres. I'm going to try horror one day. I haven't did it yet, but I did a short story in horror, and I'm going to try horror as a book one day. I haven't gotten there yet.
Would you say one genre is more difficult or more rewarding than another?
I wouldn't say they are more difficult, but each one has its own specialities that come with it. And having to adhere to those things are what makes it more difficult. Like for science fiction, you kind of like extrapolated ideas and things that are going on today or that you hear about today. Like, let's say, warp drives, faster than the speed of light travel. Okay, well, that's going to give you certain facts and things that you have to adhere to. You still have to adhere to the laws of science. So if you could travel faster than the speed of light and go somewhere, would you send back a radio message saying that you got there? No, because by the time the radio message got there, you could have went back already and told them. So, it's the idea of you have to then account for these different things. So, you have an idea in science fiction of traveling faster than the speed of light, you got to then throw out radio. Radio don't work anymore because, you can go there and come back before you can send a message. So, that kind of thing. And that is the rewarding part of it. When you get to talking about different things, then how you conquer these certain aspects is where it becomes rewarding. Like I write adult crime novels. The Killer series is all adult crime novels, and that is a very adult type book. So it's a lot of crime, a lot of sex, and getting into there, writing scenes that are gruesome in some cases. Some people have told me, I can't unsee what you have shown me now. Thanks. But it's that type of thing, and you want to make it as real as possible.
Where do your story ideas come from?
All over. Sometimes on the news, sometimes from conversations you're having with your friends. Pegasus, the science fiction story I actually wrote that back in like the 70s or 80s when they were doing the SALT treaties. And they were talking about, getting rid of certain nuclear missiles. I think SALT was good for, short-range nuclear missiles or something like that. But anyway, so my wife asked me what did I think about the treaties. And I told her that we weren't going to have a nuclear war, not an all-out nuclear war with anybody, because basically we don't have another place to go. So once we developed that idea and we had the place else to go, then nuclear war will be back on the table. So that's where Pegasus came in. Pegasus was the first starship, and we found a planet that would be inhabitable. And once you find that, We still had all the same problems we had before.
But we have a
even more
backup.
problems. Yeah, but we got even more problems. But now we had a place to go, and now, somebody could push the button and say, I can get rid of all of these guys. I'll take the new planet.
What are your goals as an author?
To entertain with my stories. I do want people to read them and to enjoy them. They're not all fun. They're not all funny. Some of them are rather dark. Some of them are rather thought-provoking. But there's entertainment in that. That's my first goal as an author, to entertain. My second one is part of that entertainment is to be thought-provoking. I like the ideas to make you think and make you say, that's interesting. I never pictured it that way.
How do you decide between a single story or a series?
Usually the series will come to me as a whole idea, like the Killer series. When I started writing that, I already knew it was going to be multiple books, but it was going to be about the life of these people, the life of Mojo. And I actually wrote the first book because I wanted to get to the second book. So the second book is sort of like the whole crux of the information about how he becomes an international criminal. But in order to get to that part, I had to write the first book, and I wanted to show that people who are these type of criminals, they're not just accidentally all of a sudden, here I am, I'm now a criminal. They pretty much had criminal intentions from the time they were young, and they grew up into being these international crime figures. But a lot of times people will see somebody years later, and they were like, first off, being in New York, a lot of people would say, oh, I didn't know he was that type of person. I didn't know he was into that. And, because they keep these things hidden from the world. And when you do find out about them, you're like, your next door neighbor turned out to be a mob boss. You're like, oh, I didn't know he was in the mob. Yeah, of course you didn't. He's not going to go out there and tell
He's not going to tell you.
But yeah, when you look at the guy's life, okay, when he was 15, he was robbing cars. When he was 18, he shot a guy. When he was 25, he shot his boss, and now he's the mob boss. So it's that type of thing. And knowing that I'm going to tell the story from when these guys were teenagers and to the time that they grow up and he has his own kids, and she's going to take over the mob. So I'll give you a little idea about where the story goes. So, but you see how their life goes in and out of these different situations. So that's naturally going to be several books, 4 books to be exact. So I already knew from the time I started writing this thing, and the time I started thinking about it, that it was going to be a series. Take something like Pegasus. It's really a one-off. It's really a single book because it tells you the story of them finding this new planet, and they're going to go and make this journey to this new planet, and things go horribly wrong very, very quickly. There's a nuclear war, and the two people, Zach and Zoe, are launched into space on Pegasus. They're the only 2 people on the ship because when they launched the war, they launched that ship to save it from being destroyed. And they're the only 2 people on the ship. And the idea is, what do they do? Do they go back and see if anybody's alive? Do they go off and become Adam and Eve on the new planet? And first off, they don't even have control of the ship because obviously they were not the bridge control people. They had different jobs, and so they're on a runaway ship and they have to get control of the ship. So it's pretty much a one-off story. Now I have ideas to do another story based on that, on the whole technology, the whole time period, but it's not really tied to the story, so as if it was a series. If that makes any sense to you?
It does. So I understand you write under other names besides J.L. Hill.
Yes, I write under my actual name, which is James L. Hill, James L. Hill,
Mm-hmm.
and J.L. Hill because I don't want people who would find my one story I think the other story is going to be the same. Like I said, the adult crime novel, very dark, a lot of sex, very graphic. So somebody will read that and say, okay, fine, I'll read this one. And they find out, well, this one is rather weak. And it's weak because it wasn't meant to be as graphic. And as it's a good story, it tells a good, it tells a good tale of everything. But yeah, it's not graphically told because it's not that type of story. So those stories I write underneath my regular name, James L. Hill, like Pegasus and the Emerald Lady, because they don't lend themselves to that type of tale as the killer stories do. And the same way it goes the other way too. I don't want someone reading the Emerald Lady and say, "Oh, that was a fantastic story. Let me read the killer story," and then their jaw hits the floor. Like, my God, this is terrible. It's all this sex and all this violence, and so.
Yeah, people are always expecting to get the same kind of writing every time they read something from the same author. That's a very good point.
Yes, they do. Yes, and that's branding. You get that branding on you, and it's like a lot of people do that too. They'll write on a completely different name because they don't want to mess up their main brand. Like they become famous as writing one thing, and then they jump in and they write a romance story, and it's like, well, the romance don't take off. Nobody knows it's me, so I'm okay with it. Rather than saying, "Oh, he wrote a romance and it's horrible."
Because they're expecting something else.
Don't mean you could write everything. I just switch around a lot, so I get a lot of practice in a lot of different genres. So they're kind of like neck and neck as to how my career as a writer goes.
Well, it looks like we're out of time for today, but anyone interested in purchasing this book can log into semediapro.com, visit Amazon, or you can purchase it directly from RockHillPublishing.com. Also, that is James L. Hill's publishing company's website, RockHillPublishing.com. That's J.L. Hill, author of Killer with Three Heads, Book 2 in the Killer series. Thanks again for joining us today, James.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Likewise. And listeners, if you're interested in getting your book published, please visit us at semediapro.com and click on the book publishing link. This is Jodi Hockinson, host of Southeast Media Sunrise, Southeast Media Productions. Like us on Facebook at Southeast Media Productions or visit our website at semediapro.com.